Hello everybody, welcome to my adoption channel, and today we're going to talk about how to help adopted children to listen better, and of course that's a big subject. So my name is Nairi, I'm running an adoption support channel. Please subscribe if you've not found me before. So the first thing to say about how to get adopted children to listen are there are lots of reasons why they don't listen. So the first thing I'm going to do in the video is cover all of the reasons why they may not listen, and then I'm going to cover with you the things that you can try and do to help them to listen better. So first of all, one of the reasons why adopted children may not listen is because of trauma. So not necessarily trauma that's happening to them there and then, but episodes and triggers that take them back into the past, or things that may not appear to you to be relating to take them back into the past, but they are. And sometimes you'll see that gaze come over them. It's like a glaze. Sometimes you can call it a catatonic state, which is something more that you use when you describe adults generally, but they go into kind of like a gaze, and it feels like that they're distant and that they're not listening to you. So that's one reason why they may not listen. Another reason might just simply be because they want to control what's going to happen every minute of the day, and that can be also quite common with adopted children. And so they're not going to let you in with your ideas because they think their ideas are going to be better than yours. Another reason why they might not listen. Another reason might be because they have a very short attention span and they are very easily distracted. And so let me give you an example of this. It kind of like, for me, this could be a mixture between distraction, attention problems, and also triggers. And I'm never really sure with my boys which way this is going. But we were in the car the other day and my son said, "What are we having for tea?" And I said, "We're going to actually have a roast dinner tonight." So then he went off into another conversation and he just seemed to go off into his own little world. And then within 3 minutes he said, "What are we having for tea tonight?" And I said, "I've just told you we are having roast dinner." And you know what? Even though he'd heard it with his ears, he hadn't actually taken that information in. So that is a situation where he was distracted. He was talking about school or something else. He was very easily distracted. Another one that can happen is a one-track mind. So it's almost like they're expecting to hear something, and so they are asking for it over and over again because they're expecting you to say to them that that's what's going to happen. And it might be because that's what they've had before and they've enjoyed it. And then another reason might be sensory distractions. It's a little bit different from attention problems. So lots of noise going on, light or other things that kind of impact on the senses. Children that struggle particularly with noise, obviously with hearing, and that's why they don't seem to be able to listen, especially when they've got those things happening around them. We can have just generally a lack of understanding, so that your child just seems to kind of not understand what you're saying to them, and therefore they're not processing it and it appears that they're not listening. So just a general lack of understanding about what's important, whether that be routines, cleanliness, meal times, getting shoes on at the right time, paying attention to switching the telly off, whatever. They don't seem to have the understanding that what you're trying to say to them is important and they need to be listening to you. And then last but of course not least is just defiance. They've heard you, they've even repeated back to you what you've said, and they know what you're asking of them, and they don't want to do it. Defiance. So that's the last one. And I guess when we first started this video, we were all thinking about a child not listening, they're just defiant, they don't want to do it. But actually, as you can see, there's lots of reasons why children might not actually retain and take that information in that you're asking them to do. So I want to put a caveat on this. I'm assuming that you would have tested them for their hearing, and we had to do this when one of our sons was quite young because he appeared not to hear anything we said, and his hearing was perfectly fine. But you do need to get the hearing tested, because without that you can't be 100% sure that it isn't their hearing. Then you have to kind of rule that out before you start looking at all these other things. So let's look at what you can then do about this. So when it comes to trauma and adopted children, if you experience trauma, this is kind of a very unique situation when they go into like this catatonic gaze. And I guess around that is really important to work out what those triggers might be. We kind of worked out roughly what they are with our sons, but it can still happen unexpectedly, where they seem to be going off on one, seem to be quite agitated, and actually it's a trigger from something. It's not necessarily taking them straight back into their past, but it's triggers that often make them feel anxious and kind of like distant from us. And so you need to know what they are, and once you know what they are, you need to let that time pass. So when you see that gaze happen, when they go off into the distance, try to call them back in from that if you can, but there's no point in giving them any instructions or asking anything of them, because when they are in that state, they're just not going to be able to take anything in, and I think you just have to kind of accept that from them. So the next thing is if a child wants to control all of the time everything that you want to do, and therefore they don't want to listen to what you have to say. I think in that situation, as in with a lot of these situations, you would 100% have to get your eye contact with them, and you'd have to basically call a spade, and by that I mean you need to kind of speak out what you think is happening, and you say to them, look, I don't think you want to go to the park, not because you don't want to go to the park, you're asking to go and do XYZ because you want to make the decisions, but actually, you know, it'd be really nice to go to the park today. Make sure that you have that conversation with them and get them to see what they might be doing, because they may not even realizing that they're doing it. The other thing that we talked about was attention or distraction, so the inability to actually hold any attention span. Now, with that situation in the car that I was explaining to you, when I think about it, I don't think our son actually answered us when we said we're having a roast tonight. Not that I'd expect him to be sort of super excited about having a roast, but normally you'd get some sort of acknowledgement, wouldn't you? And somebody would say to you, oh, okay, yes, all right, either I'd love a roast or I'd hate a roast, but you'd expect something. So when it comes to children that have very short attention, you 100% need to know that they've actually heard the instruction, and if possible, get eye contact again, but ask for an answer or wait for an answer, and if the answer hasn't happened, repeat it again. Keep what you say short and sweet. Never kind of complicate anything. And the next one is the kind of one-track mind of repeating things over and over again to you, and almost kind of talking over you, so that it's a bit different from control. It's wanting to have things repeated in their routines and kind of talking over you to get those things repeated. Again, you're going to need to stop them, you're going to need to get eye contact with them. And if it comes to wanting repetition because you've almost got these autistic traits where children are saying, well, or expecting something to happen and therefore not hearing what you're saying, because yesterday they took the dog to the park with you, and so today they're going to take the dog to the park with you. You just said to them you're not going to do that because you don't have time, but they've not heard it because they are in a repetitive pattern of their lives, and they're having this expectation that certain things are going to happen. Now, those autistic traits might not mean your child is autistic. You give them some familiarity, yes, but that you do break the routine sometimes, and you do explain to them why you're doing that and get their attention while you're doing that. And this is something that can be very useful for nearly all of these things that I'm saying to you, all of these reasons why children don't listen, is when it comes to children that like lots of repetition, or children with sensory issues, or just you find it really hard to like break through, then visual clues are really, really helpful. Now, this can be quite sort of challenging when you've got to show pictures all the time, or you could have posters on the wall or visual timelines, but for a lot of children, especially if they're younger, it really, really works. So obviously what you can do is you can have your routines on the walls, and if you're not getting through saying, I really need you to clean your teeth now, you can point and go, well, it's time to clean your teeth now, and there's a picture of somebody on a poster, on a timeline, or you've got a picture of clean your teeth now. And for some children, you know, that's the only thing that actually helps them, because they're not listening to you and they need to see those visual clues. So we haven't dealt yet with lack of understanding. So some adopted children have development issues, they have speech and language issues, and for them you're saying something and they're not understanding. So we have this a lot in our house with one of my other sons. We'll say something we think we've got through, but actually he's understood something completely different, and then that thing doesn't get done. So this is where you've you've got a much more difficult thing on your hands because you're talking at 2 different levels all the time. And again, the visual clues could be a massive help to you, but eye contact is a must. But also a must is very, very, very simple instructions. So always give 1 instruction at a time, never give 2, and make sure that they've really heard that 1 instruction. When you give choices, just keep it to the minimum if you want to give choices. So don't go complicating things by giving them 3 choices at a time. 2 is more than enough. So just keep your language very, very simple. If you think about a child that may possibly have autistic traits and therefore thinks in black and white, if you think about a child that may have development issues and thinks in terms of different language than you do, then you need to keep things very, very simple, without a huge imagination in there, really without much joking in there, and without much interpretation for anything else. So for example, a little birdie told me so. Maybe your child's going to think a bird's come in through the window and told you something, and I know that's a silly example, but sort of pictorial language is not going to work with those children. So that's another thing to bear in mind. And finally, of course, you have the whole defiance, and I'm sure you're waiting to hear what I have to say about that. Well, I like to think that I've got all the answers. Of course I don't, and you know that. You know I have challenges with my boys. If you've looked on my channel, please check it out. But defiance is something that is about control, but it's slightly different. A child that just wants to control because they're anxious around letting you make decisions is different from a child who is defiant because they really just want to be defiant. And yes, children want to be defiant sometimes, and we're ridiculous if we think they don't want to be, because sometimes they do. So what you can do with this is, again, you've got to keep your language simple. So if you ask for something specific to happen, could you pick your clothes off of the floor please, and they just like blankly say no, I want to carry on playing. Okay, so you don't change that language. You don't change it to, well, I'd like you to pick your clothes up off the floor because if you don't, blah 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 blah. Don't make it longer, don't make it more complicated. Do not negotiate. If you believe that those clothes need to be picked up off the floor, then you don't back down and go and do it for them when you get fed up. So what you can do though is say, well, of course, if those clothes do not get picked up off the floor, then this will not happen. So you give them consequences. You don't give them consequences that are far above what it should be, and you don't give them consequences less than it should be. So I kind of like, it has to match. Got to make sure they've heard you. You've got to make sure that you keep it simple and you don't negotiate with a defiant child. It's going to seem super hard. We've got it in our home. It's super hard. You want to give in because it's very tiring. But I think as children get older, then that defiance becomes much more of a problem. A defiant 14-year-old is no joke. And so if you're dealing with a child that's pre-teen, it's really important that if you believe that you're asking something that is just natural that they should be doing for you, then you've got to kind of stick to your guns. So guys, I hope that helps you. There's a lot in this video, there's a lot to unpack. Think about your child, think about what aspects you think your child is displaying, and then think about how you're going to deal with that non-listening based on your child, because every child is different. So please subscribe if you haven't already. Please check out my channel. There are over 200 videos on there that can help you as an adoptive parent, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video. Thank you.